Hi guys, in this video I'll talk about variables. I'll start out by explaining what a variable is, then I talk about declaration, I talk about initializing a variable, and about assigning a value to a variable. Let's start out with step 1. What is a variable? So a variable is some space in memory that we can use to store values in. And we can read those values, we can update the value in that space. And so it helps us to keep track of information in our program. Whenever we allocate memory, we have to initialize it. So when we allocate it, we have some memory available, and we don't really know what's stored at that point. We just say, this is a memory, I use it to store something. But we have to initialize it, and that means we put an initial value in it. For example, if we store a number, we can initialize it to 0. Or we could initialize it to 20. So initialization is really just placing the very first value in that memory location. Then with assignments, we can update the value. So if we no longer want to store 20 in it, instead we want to store 18, we can update it. Now, for every memory that we reserve, we have to specify the data type of the value that we are storing in it. So for example, in this case, we have a data type that would be a whole number, and we can store any whole number from negative numbers such as negative 18 to positive numbers such as 1020. But if we wouldn't want to store numbers in it, we could store something else. We could store a character, we can store a floating point number. The important thing is that whenever we allocate memory, we have to specify the data type. And every memory that we allocate is limited. So we can only store a certain range of values in that memory location. Once the number is too large for that memory location, it will no longer fit. But for the most part, we don't have to worry about it. Now, when we use variables in our program, we don't refer to the memory location by address. Instead, we use an identifier. So the identifier helps us to keep track of the memory location. And so we can use that identifier to read the value and to set a value on a variable. Let's move on to step 2, the declaration. So whenever we declare a variable, we essentially allocate memory. We create a new variable, and that variable gives us some memory to work with. And the format of a variable declaration is data type, then we have an identifier and a semicolon. So the data type essentially specifies how large the memory location is. The identifier helps us that we create a custom name for that memory location, and this should be very meaningful. The identifier also follows some naming convention, but I'll talk about the naming convention in a separate video. So let's look at an example. Let's say we want to create a variable that can store whole numbers. So the data type would be int, and then I want to store a number. So I just name this number, this variable. Now what is happening is we have here a variable location, or a variable that is named number. We haven't initialized it, so we don't really know what's stored in it at that point. Now let's look how we initialize it, step 3. So initialization, we have the format is basically we have the identifier, we have an equal sign, and we have a value. And then again, a semicolon to mark the end of the statement. Now we want to initialize the variable number. So that's our identifier. We use the equal sign, that means assignment. It doesn't mean comparison, so we don't check for equality. We really use an assignment. And let's say I put 5 and a semicolon. This will take the value of 5 and place it into our variable named number. So now we have 5 stored in this variable. Now both of these we can also combine. We can have declaration and initialization as a single statement. So remember, when we declare a variable, when we create a new variable, we always need to specify the data type. We never need to specify the data type again. It's really just when we declare the variable. So here, let's use a variable integer. And I call this number2 because number I used already. They have to be unique. And now I combine it with the initialization. So I declare the variable number2 and I initialize it to 20. What will happen is I will have a second variable in memory. So here I have number2 that stores the value 20. And now I have these two variables and I can read them and output them. For example, I could say I want to output the variable number. When I output it, it will see this is a variable. It will read from the variable. Currently it stores 5 and it will output 5. So if I run this, we would get 5 on the console. Now we can also update the value, and this is the assignment here. Now essentially we did already an assignment because initialization is an assignment. Initialization is the very first assignment of a variable. So assignment simply is the identifier equals the value, and it is the exact same thing as the format of initialization. The difference is initialization is the very first assignment. So let's assign something to number 1. Let's say, I think I just called it number. So number equals -38. Now this will update the value 5 to 38. I can also say I want to update number 2 to store the value that is currently stored in the variable number. So this will read the value in number, which is 38, and then assign it to the variable number 2. So number 2 will be updated to 38 as well. And now both of them store the same value. Now, some common pitfall is that we forget to initialize a variable. Let's say we have a variable, and I keep it as integer here. Let's say we have variable number 3, or let's say a variable, let's call it age, and we want to output it. Now what happens is we get a compile error. So if we look at this, the local variable age may not have been initialized. So this tells us that we created a variable, and let's visualize it up here. We called it age, but we didn't initialize it. So there's really a question mark what value this holds. It could really be anything. And since we don't know what's stored in it, the program says, I cannot work with this. I need to know what the value is. There has to be some value in it. So what we can do is then use kind of like a default value such as 0. So we place 0 in it. And then we can start reading the value and the error will go away. So for every variable that we declare, we have to make sure we initialize it. Sometimes we can initialize it in a single statement, like the declaration and initialization combined. Other times we may just want to reserve some memory and then wait until we get some user input so the user decides what the initial value is. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.